Hey booktube, it's Sarah and welcome back to my channel, The Book Bag. Today I'm going to be talking about my best books of 2021 as well as my least favorite / DNFs from 2021. So it's going to be a real roller coaster of emotions. I'm going to start off on a high note, so we're going to start with the best books of the year. So throughout the year I kept like this bracket of the best books from each month and then like pitted them against each other to find my one best book of the year, which at the end was very difficult because there were some months where my best book was like, it was good, but it wasn't like a top new favorite of mine. But then there were other months where I was like, oh my god, these are all new favorites. How do I choose between them? And that was really tough to have just like one reigning champion. But that's the point of brackets, I guess. I don't know why I did that to myself. No one asked for this, but here we are. So I'll just go down the months and then at the end I will tell you which one is my favorite out of all of them. So in January, the best book that I read that month was One to Watch by Kate Stayman London. This is a adult romance that takes place on a kind of bachelorette style reality TV show, and our main character is a fat fashion blogger, and she's kind of picking apart this show, and they reach out to her and they say, we hear your concerns, would you like to be our next like bachelorette and be on this show to start giving better representation to people? And so she agrees to do this and goes on the show, and it's really like, I think it could be pretty upsetting. It's got definitely like a lot of like fat phobia in it, just trying to like show her experiences as a fat person in the world. But it was really good. There was a very nice romance in it, and I thought it had some really good points to make about the like fat phobia in society. So I would really recommend it, just a fair warning that there are some things that may trigger some people. In February, my favorite book was One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. So you've probably heard me talk about this book before. I have a video where I cook one of the things that they talk about in here while I discuss the book. I'll have that linked up top. But this is an adult sapphic romance with like a little twist of magic. So there is Jane Sue, who is trapped on the subway from the 1970s, and our main character, August, meets her on the subway, falls in love, and then is trying to get her out of this time issue that she's facing. As you can tell, I really enjoyed this book. It's got some of the best side characters I've ever read, a beautiful found family, a wonderful romance, the most swoon-worthy love interest ever, and it just felt really relatable. Like I wanted to see like a New Girl style show with all of these characters in it, and just the way they talk is how me and my friends talk, and it just, I don't know, it really filled a hole in my heart that I didn't realize I needed filling. So, I highly recommend this one. My March favorite book of the month was Plain Bad Heroines by Emily M. Danforth. It's got a beautiful cover. It's also got some illustrations throughout it, which is really great. We love an illustrated book. And it's kind of a sapphic, gothic, not quite horror, but like dark academia sort of thing. It's got two different timelines. So one is kind of in the 1800s at the Brookhampton School for Girls, and there's these three girls who kind of get into this potential magic, something's going on weird, and they all end up dead. The school has to close down. And then the other part is this like genius young writer who has written this book about the past events, and then she has her book being turned into a movie, so it follows her as well as the main actresses in this movie as they go to this condemned school, like the abandoned school now, and are filming, and weird stuff starts happening. It's kind of got like supernatural elements, and it was just really good, sapphic, adult fantasy sort of. Magic realism? I don't know if it'd necessarily be a fantasy, but it was really good, a little bit creepy, like really enjoyable. It's a lot to explain, but it was really good. My favorite book that I read in April was Raybearer by Jordan Ifueko. This is such a good teen fantasy, or just like fantasy in general, but this is a YA fantasy. But basically our main character has been kind of cut off from the world, and she's been isolated in this little castle for her entire life. She's only ever visited by her mother, who she calls the Lady. So she is very like desperate for human attachment and just like a sad little lonely girl. And then one day her mother is like, the emperor's son is looking for his counsel. And so there are kind of tryouts almost. So people from all over the country come to the Emperor's palace and they all try and connect with the Emperor's son. And then if they do, they form like a mind bond called the Ray. And so our main character is one of those children who goes to try and connect with the Emperor's son. But what she doesn't know is that her mother has kind of cursed her to make her kill the Emperor's son. So she's just there being like, please love me. And meanwhile, her mother is like, kill him, kill him. And it's just really good. It has a lot of twists and turns that I didn't really expect. But this and its sequel is also really good. There's a really lovely romance. Again, like a great found family in this. And just like really solid world building as well. So I would highly recommend this one. I don't think it gets recommended enough. It's incredible. So for May, my favorite book was Know My Name by Chanel Miller. This is a nonfiction book. It's a memoir. So the author, Chanel Miller, is the victim of the Stanford rape case. You may know the perpetrator's name, Brock Turner. That was the one that was in the media, and she was anonymous. But she decided that it was her time to tell her side of the story, and she published her story on BuzzFeed and then wrote a book about it, and it is just incredible. It is heartbreaking and beautifully written. It's so poetic, and it's just, yeah, it's just incredible. Obviously, there are a lot of trigger warnings about sexual assault in this, but it's very much worth the read, and I think everyone probably cries when they read this. I know I did, but it's amazing. It's truly a work of art. So in June, my top book of the month was Can't Take That Away by Stephen Salvatore. So this is a YA book about a non-binary teen who is fighting the transphobic rules at their school and kind of leading this like student-led revolution against the administration. So this was a really great story about like, you know, young leadership, about the next generation taking charge. I really loved having a non-binary protagonist, and there was a lot of discussion about like changing pronouns because they were kind of gender fluid. So they would have these bracelets where it would be like, here are what pronouns I'm using today. So if it was blue, then the protagonist wanted to use he, him pronouns, or if it was like pink, it'd be she, her pronouns, etc., etc. I thought that was a really good way of kind of introducing the idea of gender fluidity and non-binary people, and I thought it was really well done and just really excellent. So my top book in July was The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green. Once again, you can tell I loved it. This is a series of essays by John Green, the YA author, but it is taken from his podcast, also called The Anthropocene Reviewed. Some of them are from the podcast, but expanded. Some of them are new ones that he's written just for the book. But it's basically, the idea is that he is rating the human experience on a 5-star scale, kind of like Yelp reviews. And it's really surprisingly beautiful. Like, it is funny in some parts, but some of them are just really deep, for lack of a better word. And you've got ones, you know, about like sunsets. You've got ones about Canada geese, or like the movie Penguins of Madagascar. And it's also a little bit like a memoir, because John Green really like interweaves his life throughout the different stories. And it was just really good. I'm pretty sure this one made me cry as well. I just, you know, I always like what John Green does. I love the Vlogbrothers and all that Nerdfighteria stuff, and I just think this is one of his best books. It's really like emotional and beautifully written, and it really does make you appreciate all the weird little nuances of the world around you and your place within it. My top book in August was Luck of the Titanic by Stacey Lee. So this is a YA historical fiction book that reimagines the lives of the Chinese passengers on the Titanic. But basically, recently they had discovered that there were Chinese passengers on the Titanic, and that is what inspired this book. This follows Valora Luck, who is trying to reunite with her twin brother and convince him to rejoin their like acrobat act, join a circus in America so that they can escape England and all the issues they had there. So I really love the Titanic for some reason. That sounds really terrible to say, but I am always very intrigued by the idea of the Titanic, and I really loved Stacey Lee's other book that I read, The Downstairs Girl. So this was just like a combination of two amazing things, and it was so good. I really liked the characters in this. There was great attention to detail when like talking about the Titanic and stuff, and it was really good. Obviously, it was quite sad. It's the Titanic. we all know how that ends. But this was such a good historical fiction, especially since so many historical fiction books take place in World War II. And like this is just, yeah, a nice fresh breath of air in the historical fiction. Okay, next up in September, my favorite book was How Moon Fuentez Fell in Love with the Universe by Raquel Vasquez Gilliland. So this follows Moon Fuentez, who is going on this kind of Instagram influencer tour with her sister, Star, who is the influencer. Moon just does her photos. So Moon feels like she is the fat, ugly sister and has like really terrible self-confidence and everything. And this book is about her finding her own self-worth, falling in love with herself, and also the like cute brother of the organizer of this tour. And it's just really beautiful. The author is a poet, so she writes very beautifully. It's very lyrical. And there's just such a wonderful story of Moon like accepting herself, falling in love with herself, and standing up against like her family's toxic relationships. There was a beautiful love story as well. I think this is a really excellent love story for like older teens. There are some more mature topics, like it's pretty sex positive, so definitely for the older teens, but I just think it's quite beautiful and a really important read for like older teens. Moving on down the line. Next up, October. My favorite book I read in October was Somebody's Daughter by Ashley C. Ford. This is another memoir. Apparently 2021 was a year of memoirs, but Ashley C. Ford's father was incarcerated when she was very young, and she grew up most of her life with him in prison. She wasn't really sure why, but he just was absent from her life, so this talks about her growing up with her mother, who was kind of toxic, kind of abusive, and also this image of who she thinks her father is, based on like the letters they would write to each other. And it just made me sob. Like, I bawled my eyes out reading this book. It was beautiful. It was about like different family relationships and the ways that someone's absence can have us like construct our image of who they are in our head, and the realities of them might not match up with that. It was just really beautifully written, and I just like wanted to protect little baby Ashley so bad from all the things that were going wrong in her life. Yeah, I would highly recommend that one. It's excellent. All right, in November was a really good reading month. I read a lot of really good books, but my top book was We Are Not Free by Tracy Chee. So this follows a group of 14 Japanese American teenagers as their families are being put into internment camps during World War II. This is told through the 14 different points of view throughout the span of several years as they are living in their homes in California and then are moved to these different internment camps and then go on from there. It was really well written. You felt just so awful for all these characters who, you know, were just kids. None of them or their families had done anything wrong, and they were being locked up in these camps because the government was afraid of them and because of horrifying racism. I think it was very interesting to see them kind of going through the typical teenage phases of the crushes and the dating and stuff, but having to do it while they were trapped in these camps, and like the ways that they would make little bits of joy for themselves despite their pretty horrendous circumstances. And as well, the different, like for example, the government asked them to choose whether or not they would renounce Japan and be like, no, I'm an American, I'm not Japanese at all, so they could then be released from the camps, and the different kind of discussions around what the families were doing. Do they like give up their, you know, dignity and their identity in order to not be living in these camps? Do they cling to that but are stuck in the camps? I think this is probably like the best addition to World War II historical fiction, because a lot of it focuses on, you know, the fighting in Europe as well as like the Holocaust, which are obviously very important, but this is an aspect of it that was not really touched on as much, and I know that especially in like school and stuff it wasn't discussed as much, but was like a really horrific thing to have happen to people. I just thought Tracy Chee did a really good job of having 14 very distinct voices that like you could keep track of really easily, and making you care for all these characters so deeply, as well as talk about this lesser known facet of World War II. So my top book of December was Little Thieves by Margaret Owen. I got this in the Illumicrate November box, which is why it's got all these beautiful stained edges. And Margaret Owen actually did the illustrations on the hardback here, which are amazing. This is a retelling of the Goose Girl fairy tale, which I'm not super familiar with, but our main character is Vanya, who has stolen the princess of the land's life and is like masquerading as her, trying to escape her life before, which was kind of as a servant. And her godmothers are Death and Fortune, and they have told her that it is now time for her to decide which one of them she'll serve for the rest of her life. And she doesn't want that, so she is trying to get out of there. She's trying to, like, you know, steal money and stuff so that she can escape this future servitude that, you know, she's like, I just want to live my life. I don't want to have to be a servant forever. What the heck? And while she's, you know, robbing and doing crimes to get money to escape, she's being pursued by kind of like a law enforcement guy who is trying to catch her and stop her from doing this. It was a really cool fantasy. It was really interesting following the kind of villain of the story, but I think Margaret Owen did an excellent job of making her super like sympathetic and relatable, because I felt really bad for her and I was rooting for her even when she was like, I'm robbing people, and I was like, you get that money, girl. And there was a really great romance in it, as well as some asexual representation, which was really great because you don't see that very often. But yeah, I really loved it. And there's a companion novel coming out in 2023, I believe, where I think the main character starts a cult. So I'm super excited about that as well. I think it should be excellent. So those are the books from the months that I loved. And then I also have a bonus favorite, which is, to no one's surprise, Iron Widow by Sharon J. Zhao. I read this in one of the months when the other books I read were also amazing, so it didn't make it as like my top book of that month, but it's definitely, I enjoyed this one more than some of the other ones on my list, if that makes sense. Anyways, this is just like an all-around excellent book. I have a whole reading vlog where I talk about it. I'll link that up top, wherever that is. And it's a really great YA sci-fi retelling of China's first female emperor, first and only female emperor. And it's kind of like Pacific Rim, but feminist. And it's just, it's so good. The main character is so angry and I love her so much and I just want her to destroy everyone. And it's got a polyamorous relationship, so there's like, what's not to love? And the author's Canadian, so and just, you know, this book has everything going for it. And it delivers. There's also a sequel coming out, I believe next year, which I'm super excited about. Don't know when, but as soon as they announce the date, I'm pre-ordering that book, because I have to know what happens. So those are my top books of the year. So based on my bracket here, I did determine that One Last Stop was my top book of the year. I think mostly just because I recommend that to everyone, but these were all really excellent books. I would highly recommend you check all of them out. Okay, now we're going to talk about the worst books of the year. So I did do a similar thing for my least favorite books of the year, where I made like a bracket, but some of these weren't ones that were bad for me, like that I hated. They were just ones that weren't as good. Like they were like a 3-star read rather than like a 1 or 2-star like some of the other ones. So I decided not to talk about 12 books because some of them were like, oh yeah, this was fine. I didn't mind this. It just wasn't the best book. And instead we're going to talk about the ones that I really did not enjoy, as well as books that I DNF'd, which is did not finish. And I don't do that super often. Like a lot of times I will just kind of put one down for the moment and come back to it later. But these are ones that I just was like really struggling with and I was like, I can't do it. I'll just go read something else that I know I will like. This is not saying that any of these books are bad necessarily. They were just not for me. There were things about them that I didn't enjoy. If you enjoy these books, like that's wonderful. I'm so glad you liked them, but they weren't for me. So I'm going to start with the ones that I DNF'd because there's only a couple of them. But first off, we have The Wild Ones by Nafisa Azad. This one's a YA fantasy, so it follows this kind of group of teenage girls who are all linked because they had endured some sort of like sexual assault or something in the past, and they are banded together and given magic to kind of like enact justice or like to save other girls from the things that have happened to them. And then during the book, they have to go and save the boy who had given them this magic. So I really liked the idea of it, of this like sisterhood fighting to protect other women and girls. I really thought that was a great idea. However, I found the writing really disjointed. It was told through a bunch of different points of view and they didn't feel very distinct to me, so I was always confused about who the characters were, and I just could not figure out the world building either. I had no clue what was going on most of the time. I think I only got maybe 30 to 50 pages into it, and I was like, I'm too confused, I don't understand what's happening, and I don't want to put in the effort to figure out what's going on, so I just stopped reading it. The next one is called We Begin at the End by Chris Whitaker. So this is an adult novel, and I ended at the beginning. I got 5 pages in, and there was a line where the teen protagonist was talking about her mom and like this like sheriff that she grew up with, and said, not sure what their relationship is, but I'm pretty sure he wants to bang my mom just like every other man in town. And I put it down. I was like, no thank you, I'm done, goodbye. I don't know if it was just that it was written by a man that annoyed me, because I feel like if it had been written by a woman, it was more of a commentary on saying something bad about the men, but this felt more of a commentary on like, oh, the mom's just an object. I don't know, something about it just didn't sit right with me, and I've heard it's a really good book, and it's kind of this like relationship between this 13-year-old who's trying to take care of her mom and the sheriff who grew up with the mom, and them trying to help each other, I guess. But that line, I couldn't get past it. I tried twice to read it, and I just got there and shut the book and put it away, and I was like, nope. I'm done. I can't do it. So the last book that I DNF'd this year was How to Marry Keanu Reeves in 90 Days by K.M. Jackson. I actually got this as an ARC from NetGalley, and I thought it sounded super cute. The cover is adorable, and the basic idea is there is Bethany Liu, who is a 40-something-year-old artist, and she's obsessed with Keanu Reeves, and it's announced that Keanu is going to get married in 90 days, so her and her best friend True go on a road trip to try and stop that, and then they don't start to fall for each other, but they like finally admit their feelings for each other and get together. And I think the idea is that she's using her obsession with Keanu Reeves as a coping mechanism for something that has happened in the past. But I didn't get that far into the book to be able to say that for sure. I think I got 30% of the way into the book, if I'm not wrong. And I couldn't do it. I had a hard time connecting with either of the characters because it is dual point of view between True and Lou, but I couldn't connect with them. I did not feel like these were people in their 40s. She definitely acted like she was a 20-year-old. And the concept was so weird. I thought there was going to be more upfront about like the Keanu thing being a coping mechanism for something else. But I think that comes up much later because that kind of wasn't discussed. It was just like, she loves Keanu Reeves. She has like, her room is a shrine to Keanu Reeves. She's going to go stop him from getting married. She is like legitimately upset about this, and it's not about anything else. And I just found that very bizarre. The celebrity worship was just like a little bit too much for me. So unfortunately I had to put it down because I tried really hard to get through it. I wanted to review it, but I couldn't, sadly. Up next are books that I probably should have DNF'd, but I finished reading and did not like. So most recently I read Pride and Prejudice and Mistletoe by Melissa de la Cruz, which is a like gender swapped version of Pride and Prejudice set in modern day. And I just could not sympathize with these characters. They were all like super duper rich, like millionaires. Like the main character Darcy, she would just throw money at things all the time and like solve her problems. So I was like, must be nice, jeez. Also, it felt like there was no agency for the characters. They didn't seem to make decisions, like decisions were made for them and they just kind of did whatever, even though these were supposed to be like adults with successful careers who had like lived on their own. Like this wasn't like, you know, early 20s where they're like, I don't know what's happening. They were supposed to be like in their 30s or something, well-established people who just kind of floated along and let things happen to them. And there was one scene where they kissed for an hour outside in the snow, and I was like, you would get frostbite. Obviously this author lives in like California or something, because you cannot kiss for an hour outside in the snow. You can kiss for like a minute maybe outside if it's snowing, but like you get cold. You would get frostbite or hypothermia or something. Ugh. As someone who lives in Canada, somewhere where it snows a lot, that just like took me right out of the book. I almost stopped reading after that point, but it was so short that I was like, I'll just finish it and then be done with it. Next up, we have Hounded by Kevin Hearn. So this is an adult fantasy novel following like an ancient druid who runs his little like bookshop. He's got I think it's a sword that like this big like Celtic god is coming after him for. So it's him teaming up with the other supernatural creatures that he knows, trying to like defeat this god and keep his fancy sword. Which sounds cool, like I like the idea of a druid and like he runs a bookshop, that's super fun. But good God, was the main character awful. He was just he had the sense of humor of a 12-year-old boy. He was so overpowered that, like, anytime he was in a situation, he's like, oh, I just do this magic and I'm fine. Everything's solved. Oh, I got hurt. It's fine. I just healed myself. Oh, they're in trouble. Okay, yeah, magic. It's done. So the stakes, there were no stakes in it because he could just fix everything with magic. He never struggled with anything. It was like, oh, it took me a little bit longer, but I figured it out. And I was like, what? And it was just also incredibly misogynistic. All the women in it were just, like, he slept with every single woman who was mentioned. All, like, 3 of them that were mentioned in the book. He slept with them. And they were, like, gods and stuff. And he was like, oh, I'm just too irresistible. So, yeah, I know a lot of people really like this book for some reason, but I just found him, the main character, horrendously obnoxious, misogynistic, and, like, way too overpowered for me to really feel any tension that he's gonna not be okay. It was awful. Don't read it. Don't read it. There are so many better fantasy books, and, like, maybe his other stuff later on is better. Maybe he learned to make his characters more likable, but, like, oh, I just want to strangle this guy. So bad. Okay, next one is Simmer Down by Sarah Smith. This is an adult romance, which follows 2 rival food truck owners as they kind of, like, fight over, like, the food truck spot and clash heads and then start to fall for each other. It's an enemies to lovers romance, and it was just not great for me. I did not really enjoy it all that much. There was way too much emphasis on the enemies at first, where it was really hard to come back from that. Like, the love interest was just way too much of a jerk that by the time that they were supposed to be falling for each other, you're like, I can't forgive him. Like, he still feels like the antagonist to me. So that was one problem. There's also, like, they drank all the time. They were always drinking alcohol, and, like, lots of it. What were they watching? I feel like they said they watched, like, an episode of The Office and each drank a bottle of wine. And I was like, that's alcoholism, friends. That's a 20-minute episode and you drank a whole bottle of wine and it was supposed to be like a casual date? Are you okay? Like, and it just never, they were like, oh yeah, they just drink this much all of the time and it's fine. And I was just like, what's wrong with these people? But the thing that really did it for me, the cherry on top of the terrible sundae, was the big romantic gesture at the end after they'd had their big falling out. And she's like, I gotta make it up to him. I've gotta do a big romantic gesture. So she films this, I think it's like an apology video, and puts it on Facebook. And then he, like, doesn't respond, and she's like, oh no, he can't forgive me. Oh my god, I've ruined it forever. But his whole thing is that he's not on social media other than every now and then to manage his, like, food truck thing, but, like, he doesn't use social media. That's one of his big personality traits. And I'm like, why would you put that on social media? Why wouldn't you video call him, send it to him personally? But she just, like, puts it out on Facebook. He doesn't see it in the first day, and she's like, oh my god, I ruined it. He doesn't love me. And I'm like, no, you idiot. He just checks his Facebook, like, once a week, if that, so of course he's not gonna see it. And it just felt like such lazy writing. There were so many better, like, big romantic gestures that the author could have had the character make, and you still could have had some sort of tension of, like, him not reciprocating immediately. But this was, like, so obvious. Like, if you knew someone and were in love with them, you would know not to do that. It really bugged me so much. I think I talked about this previously, actually, in my One Last Stop video, where I got really heated about it, but apparently this is something I care very passionately about making romantic gestures that are appropriate for the person you are making the gesture for, and not just, like, a generic romantic gesture that would be fine for anyone, but is not specific and, like, special for that person. Anyways, yeah, it was not great. I did not really enjoy it all that much, unfortunately. It's got a really cute cover, and the idea was interesting. It was just needed a lot of refining. Oh, I also want to talk about An Emotion of Great Delight by Tahereh Mafi. So I had not read any Tahereh Mafi books before this one, and I thought it looked really cool. It was, like, a pretty short book. The cover was gorgeous, and it follows a teen who is dealing with, like, the post 9/11 fallout within her family, and just, like, the different relationship issues in the family, that sort of stuff. And I thought that the emotions were done really well. There are truly lots of emotions in this book. And so that was really well done. Like, the writing was very, like, lush and poetic, and you felt all of these emotions that the character was feeling. However, the plot didn't go anywhere. There were these, I think there were kind of, if I remember correctly, like 3 kind of main issues that she was having with various people in her life. and they just kind of like rolled over and repeated themselves throughout the book, and there was no resolution, to the point where I finished the book and I thought I had gotten a misprinted copy. I thought there were pages missing, so I went to like the bookstore and was looking through the other copies to see if I had missed, like if mine was missing pages, but it wasn't. It ended and there was no resolution. We were in the same spot where we had started, and I just felt like I read all this and nothing happened. I was like, I feel all these sad emotions, but there's no resolution at all. And it wasn't like kind of an open-ended thing. It just ended like, it felt like mid-sentence basically, where they're like, here's the things, you know, stuff's gonna happen, it's done, and you're like, I thought we were gonna then do something more? So yeah, that was really disappointing. It was a very abrupt ending, and it just kind of ruined my enjoyment of the book entirely, sadly. Last but not least is, I think my biggest disappointment, like the one that enraged me the most, but then also I was like looking forward to the most out of these ones that let me down so much. And that was A Cuban Girl's Guide to Tea and Tomorrow by Laura Taylor Namey. So this follows a Cuban teenager from Miami who has suffered a series of losses all at once and is really depressed. And so her family's concerned about her, and they send her to stay with some family friends in England to try and like lift her spirits. She's also like a baker. Her family owns a Cuban bakery, and then she goes and stays at this like bed and breakfast, so she wants to like help out with the baking there and all that sort of stuff. And this sounded so good, and I really loved the cover, but I just could not sympathize with the main character. I found her incredibly like annoying and immature, and I know she is a teenager, like that's fair that she would be immature, but I'm so sorry, because I do know a lot of people like this book, and I get to some point of her being kind of like unlikable. You know, she's like depressed, she's making irrational decisions, she's not thinking of other people because, you know, her mental health isn't great, so she's like really focused inwards, and that's totally fair, like I get that, but she was just really hard to like for me. I had a real hard time empathizing with how she treated other people. When she gets to like the bed and breakfast in England, she just like takes over the kitchen. Like this like 16-year-old is just like, I know better than you, I'm gonna make all the pastries now, and just like steamrolls over this like older lady who had been like running the kitchen. And I just found that so disrespectful, and I was like, it's like, if you do know better, that's great and you could help out, but the way that she just took over and was like, this is my gig now, get out of here, I was like, oh my god, girl, what the heck are you doing? It is also a bit of a romance. There's a love interest and they sort of get together and stuff. I honestly don't remember much of that. The romance didn't do much for me either. I didn't think they had a ton of chemistry. But yeah, I did not like the main character. I also found the writing was not really for me. There were several times where the author mixed metaphors. There was one where she starts talking about something in like recipe form, so it's like, you know, a dash of this, like a cup of that sort of thing, and then it turns into a metaphor about a closet, about like picking clothes out of a closet, and I was like, where'd the recipe go? What are we talking about a closet now for? So just like little things like that just kind of built up, and by the end of it I was like, oh! I also didn't feel like the main character had a ton of character development by the end. Like she was better, but she was still really annoying, and I still was like, I don't like you. And I felt really bad about that. But she was not the character for me. This was not the book for me. So those were my best books, as well as my like least favorite and DNFs of the year. Quite an emotional roller coaster, as you can tell. But let me know if you liked the books that I liked, or didn't like the books that I didn't like, or if we are just like completely different tastes and you absolutely love the books that I hated. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Book. Okay, so ending at the beginning, not beginning at the end. Maybe that's how you read the book. Maybe you read the end first, you begin at the end, and then read your way back. Well, they just want that druid dick.